A single mom found her dead husband's secret ranch hidden deep in the mountains. She thought it was just an old, abandoned property. But the moment she stepped inside, everything changed. Her loyal dog started digging, and what he uncovered left her speechless. A rusted box filled with strange documents, a locked cellar no one knew existed, and a helicopter overhead, soldiers flooding the yard in the middle of the night. What was her husband hiding here? Why did powerful men want to erase the truth? And how far would this grieving mother go to uncover the shocking legacy her husband left behind? Was this ranch just a forgotten piece of land? Or the key to a secret that could change everything she thought she knew about him? Let me know in the comments which city or country you're listening from. If you like stories that connect us, don't forget to subscribe before you leave. Sarah Mitchell stood in line at the county registrar's office, her fingers nervously playing with the certified mail slip that had arrived yesterday. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Her heart hadn't stopped racing since she'd seen the official letterhead. The line inched forward as Sarah's mind wandered to Daniel, her late husband's smile, his warm laugh, the way he'd squeeze her hand 3 times to say, "I love you." 6 months had passed since the accident, but the ache felt as fresh as ever. "Next, please," called the clerk, an older woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair. Sarah approached the counter, smoothing out the crumpled notice with trembling hands. "Good morning. I'm here to pick up certified mail." The clerk adjusted her reading glasses. "Name, please?" "Sarah Mitchell. It's regarding my late husband's estate." Something flickered across the clerk's face. Recognition, perhaps sympathy. She disappeared into a back room, returning moments later with a thick manila envelope and what appeared to be a rolled-up map. "Mrs. Mitchell, these documents confirm your husband's ownership of a property called Fallen Star Ranch." The clerk's voice was gentle. The deed was recently discovered during a county records digitization project. Sarah felt the room tilt slightly. There must be some mistake. Daniel never mentioned owning any ranch. The paperwork is quite clear. The clerk unrolled an old topographical map across the counter. Its edges were worn, the paper yellowed with age. The property lies about 40 miles north of town, out past Miller's Creek. Her finger traced a winding road leading to a marked parcel of land. Sarah stared at the map, her thoughts spinning. Daniel had been a high school science teacher, CM. They'd lived in their modest 3-bedroom house since Ben was born. How could he have owned land without telling her? The clerk reached beneath the counter and produced a ring with 2 old keys. These were found with the deed. The brass keys looked well used, their surfaces dulled with age. "I don't understand," Sarah whispered, more to herself than the clerk. "Sometimes life holds surprises for us," the clerk said softly. "Even after." She trailed off, but Sarah knew what she meant. Even after death. Sarah gathered the envelope, map, and keys with unsteady hands. Outside the office, she leaned against the cool brick wall, trying to catch her breath. She pulled out her phone and called her sister Janet. "Can you watch the flower shop today? Something's come up." "Of course," Janet replied. "Everything okay?" "I'm not sure yet. I'll explain later." Sarah drove home, her mind racing. Ben would be getting home from school soon. Her 12-year-old son had his father's curious nature and adventurous spirit. Maybe together they could make sense of this mystery. When Ben burst through the door that afternoon, Max, their German shepherd, at his heels. Sarah had already packed some supplies: water bottles, sandwiches, flashlights, and a con. First aid kit. Mom? Ben dropped his backpack, eyeing the supplies spread across the kitchen counter. What's going on? Sarah took a deep breath. I received some interesting news today. It seems your dad owns some property we didn't know about, a place called Fallen Star Ranch. I thought maybe we could go check it out together. Ben's eyes lit up, the first real spark of excitement she'd seen in them since Daniel's death. Really? Like, right now? If you're up for an adventure. Sarah managed to smile, though her stomach was doing flips. Yes. Ben was already heading for his room. Let me change clothes. Max watched them both, his tail wagging slowly, head cocked to one side as if he understood something important was happening. They loaded the supplies into Sarah's truck, Max jumping into the back seat with his usual enthusiasm. Sarah spread the map across the dashboard, studying the route. The property seemed to be tucked away in a remote area, accessible by a series of increasingly narrow roads. As they drove north out of town, Sarah couldn't help wondering what they might find. Why had Daniel never mentioned this place? The questions tumbled through her mind as familiar landscapes gave way to more rugged territory. Ben sat forward in his seat, watching the changing scenery with eager eyes. Do you think there's a house there? I honestly don't know, honey. Sarah glanced at the map again. The clerk just gave me these keys and the property documents. Max's ears perked up as they turned onto a gravel road. The truck bumped along, dust billowing behind them. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the trees, painting everything in warm golden light. After several miles, the road narrowed further, becoming little more than a dirt track. Sarah drove carefully, watching for the landmarks marked on the map: an old bridge, a lightning-struck oak, a bend in the creek. There! Ben pointed suddenly. Look! Up ahead, partially hidden by overgrown brush, stood a sagging wooden gate. Sarah pulled the truck to a stop, the engine ticking as it cooled. In the center of the gate, somehow still firmly attached despite the weathered wood around it, was a brass star, its surface dulled by years of exposure, but still clearly visible. As they stepped out of the truck, Max's usual happy demeanor changed. He moved closer to Ben, his posture stiffening, and let out a low, rumbling growl. Sarah's hand tightened around the old keys in her pocket as she stared at the gate, her heart pounding. What secrets had Daniel kept, and why? The brass star seemed to watch them, a silent sentinel guarding whatever lay beyond that weathered gate, while Max continued his unusual warning growl in the golden light of the fading afternoon. Sarah's hands trembled as she fitted the larger of the two brass keys into the cabin's front door lock. The sun was sinking behind the mountains, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. Ben stood close beside her, while Max remained unusually alert, his ears pricked forward. The lock turned with a solid click. The door creaked open, revealing a musty but surprisingly well-maintained interior. Sarah fumbled along the wall, her fingers finding a light switch. Nothing happened. There has to be power somewhere, she muttered, stepping carefully inside. The last rays of sunlight streamed through dusty windows, illuminating what looked like a comfortable living space. Ben, shine your flashlight around. See if you can spot a generator switch or electrical panel. Ben's beam danced across the walls, eventually landing on a breaker box near the kitchen area. Sarah made her way over, opened it, and found a note taped inside. Generator behind cabin. Pull start. Stay here with Max, she instructed, taking Ben's flashlight. I'll get the power going. The generator sat on a concrete pad behind the cabin, protected by a metal housing. Sarah studied it for a moment before finding the pull cord. It took 3 tries. But finally, the machine sputtered to life with a steady hum. Warm light flooded through the cabin windows. Back inside, Sarah could now see everything clearly. The main room held a kitchen area, a wooden table with 4 chairs, and a sitting space with 2 comfortable-looking armchairs. Built-in bunks lined one wall, their mattresses protected by plastic covers. The shelves were stocked with canned goods, bottled water, and basic supplies, all well within their expiration dates. "Mom, look at this," Ben called from the table. He held up a large coin, about 2 inches across. It gleamed in the electric light, obviously well cared for. One side showed a military insignia Sarah didn't recognize. "Put it back exactly where you found it, honey." Something about the coin's careful placement in the center of the table felt deliberate. Ben set it down precisely as he'd found it. Max padded around the cabin, nose working overtime. He seemed particularly interested in the floor near the bunks, scratching lightly at one spot before moving on. "Should we look around outside?" Ben asked, already heading for the door. "There might be more buildings." Sarah checked her watch. They still had about 30 minutes of twilight left. "Okay, but stay close. And Ben?" She waited until he met her eyes. "If Max acts strange about anything, we pay attention. Deal?" "Deal." They found 2 more cabins, smaller than the first but just as well maintained. Each had its own generator, though they left them off for now. The first contained what looked like a workshop, with tools hanging in neat rows on pegboards. The second seemed set up as some kind of office, with filing cabinets and a desk, though all the drawers were locked. "There's a barn too," Ben pointed out. The structure loomed at the edge of the clearing, its weathered boards silvery in the fading light. Inside the barn, their flashlight beams revealed empty stalls and a loft half filled with hay. Everything smelled fresh and clean. No rot, no animal droppings, no signs of neglect. Like the cabins, it felt as though someone had tidied up, expecting to return soon. "Mom?" Ben's voice was quiet. "Why didn't Dad ever tell us about this place?" Sarah wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "I wish I knew, sweetie. But we'll figure it out." They headed back to the main cabin as darkness settled in. Max had been circling the porch steps the entire time they'd been exploring, his nose working furiously at something only he could detect. Sarah had to call him 3 times before he finally followed them inside. She was heating soup on the cabin's propane stove when she first heard it, a distant thrumming that made the windows vibrate slightly. Max's ears shot up, and he moved to the window, hackles rising. The sound grew louder. Thump, 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 thump. "Is that a helicopter?" Ben asked, pressing his face to the glass. Before Sarah could answer, brilliant white light flooded the cabin yard. A spotlight swept across the ground, catching Max's reflection in the window. The German Shepherd let out a low growl as the beam moved methodically across the property. Sarah pulled Ben away from the window, her heart pounding. The helicopter's rhythmic beating filled the air as its spotlight continued to search the ranch yard, moving with deliberate precision across every building and open space. Max remained rigid by the window, his attention fixed on something outside that neither Sarah nor Ben could see, as the powerful beam of light swept past their cabin once again. Sarah pulled Ben closer as they crouched below the window line, their hearts pounding in sync with the helicopter's rhythmic beats. Max remained vigilant, his muscular frame tense as he tracked movement outside with unwavering focus. "Stay down," Sarah whispered to Ben, who nodded silently. Through the thin curtains, shadows danced across their yard as multiple flashlight beams crisscrossed the property. The helicopter's spotlight finally moved away, but the sound of boots crunching on gravel replaced the aerial surveillance. Sarah cautiously raised her head just enough to peek through the window. Her breath caught in her throat at what she saw. At least 6 men in dark military uniforms methodically swept the yard, their powerful flashlights illuminating every corner. They carried clipboards and what looked like electronic devices, stopping occasionally to make notes or take measurements. "What are they looking for?" Ben whispered, his voice barely audible. Sarah shook her head, watching as 2 soldiers paid particular attention to the barn, while others circled the smaller cabins. "I don't know, honey, but we're safe in here." Max's growl deepened as heavy footsteps approached the porch. 3 sharp knocks rattled the door. "Property inspection," a commanding voice called out. "Please open up." Sarah stood slowly, keeping Ben behind her. "Who are you?" she called back, trying to keep her voice steady. "Lieutenant Colonel James Marshall, United States Air Force. We need to conduct a routine inspection of this property." "At midnight?" Sarah challenged. "I have the deed to this ranch. You have no right to be here without a warrant." There was a pause, followed by hushed conversation outside. "Ma'am, this property falls under special jurisdiction due to its previous classification. We're authorized to inspect at any time." "Then, you can show me the paperwork that proves that," Sarah responded firmly. "Until then, please leave my property." More murmured discussion followed. Sarah could make out fragments. "Civilian presence. Protocols require. Need to contact." The lieutenant colonel's voice returned. "We'll be maintaining a presence at the property gate for security purposes. Someone will contact you through proper channels tomorrow." Sarah waited until the footsteps retreated from the porch before allowing herself to breathe normally again. She hugged Ben tightly, feeling him trembling slightly against her. "You were so brave, Mom," he whispered. "We both were," she replied, running her fingers through his hair. "Let's try to get some rest." But sleep proved impossible. They took turns watching through the windows as the uniformed men continued their examination of the property for several more hours. Eventually, most of the soldiers departed in military vehicles, leaving 2 guards posted at the main gate. Just after 11:30, Max's behavior changed. The German Shepherd had been alternating between window vigilance and protective positioning near Ben, but now he seemed agitated in a different way. He paced between the front door and Sarah, whining softly. "What is it, boy?" Sarah whispered, not wanting to wake Ben, who had finally dozed off in one of the armchairs. Max scratched at the door, then looked back at her expectantly. Sarah hesitated. The guards were still at the gate, but they were far enough away that they wouldn't notice if she slipped out onto the porch with Max. "Okay," she said softly, but quiet. The moment she opened the door, Max darted to the edge of the porch and began digging frantically at the dirt beneath it. Sarah watched nervously, dividing her attention between the dog and the distant gate where flashlights marked the guard's position. "Max, stop," she hissed, but the dog was determined. His powerful paws had already cleared away several inches of soil, revealing something metallic underneath. Sarah knelt down, using her phone's flashlight to examine Max's discovery. A rusted lockbox, about the size of a shoebox, had been buried beneath the porch steps. Max continued pawing at it until Sarah could grasp its handle and pull it free. The box was surprisingly heavy. Sarah glanced once more at the gate before hurrying back inside with Max and their discovery. She set it on the kitchen table, accidentally rattling its contents and waking Ben. "What's that?" he asked sleepily, moving to join her. "Max found it under the porch," Sarah explained, examining the box's simple latch mechanism. Despite the rust on its exterior, the latch moved easily, suggesting someone had accessed it relatively recently. Inside, protected by a plastic bag, they found several items that made Sarah's pulse quicken. 3 military identification badges, their photos faded but still clear enough to show young men in uniform. The names were clearly legible: Captain Daniel Peterson, her late husband's name, along with Lieutenant James Cooper and Lieutenant Michael Chen. "Dad," Ben whispered, touching one of the badges gently. Beneath the IDs lay a folded map, its creases worn but holding. When Sarah carefully opened it, they saw it was a detailed topographical map of the ranch and surrounding area. Strange symbols and markings had been added in red ink, circles, crosses, and numbers that meant nothing to Sarah. "Look at these," Ben said, pulling out 3 keys attached to a single ring. Each key had a label tied to it with faded but readable tags: barn, trunk, and lower. Sarah studied the keys, her mind racing. The military's presence, these hidden items, the map's mysterious markings. What had her husband been involved in? What was so important about this ranch that armed forces would show up in the middle of the night? The clock on the cabin wall ticked past midnight as they examined each item carefully. Max had settled near their feet, seemingly satisfied that he'd completed his mission of revealing the lockbox's location. Outside, the guards maintained their vigil at the gate, unaware of the discovery that had just added layers of mystery to an already puzzling situation. Sarah held up the key labeled barn, remembering the building's pristine interior. "There must be something we missed in there," she mused, more to herself than to Ben. "Mom," Ben said quietly, "I think Dad left these for us to find." Max knew exactly where to look. Sarah nodded slowly, recalling how their German Shepherd had been trained by Daniel before his death. Had her husband somehow prepared the dog for this moment? The thought sent chills down her spine as she looked at the 3 keys in her hand, each one potentially unlocking another piece of this growing mystery. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the morning mist as Sarah heard vehicles approaching. She stood at the cabin window, watching 3 military trucks roll up to the gate. Max's ears perked up, and he moved closer to Ben, who was still groggy from their restless night. "They're back," Sarah said quietly, her hand instinctively touching the barn key in her pocket. She'd been up most of the night, studying the mysterious map and badges they'd found in the lockbox. The sound of boots on gravel grew louder. A man in a crisp uniform approached the cabin, holding a leather briefcase. He knocked firmly on the door. "Mrs. Peterson? This is Colonel Richards. We have the necessary paperwork for a thorough inspection of the property." Sarah opened the door, keeping the chain locked. The colonel held up an official-looking document bearing multiple signatures and government seals. "A federal warrant," he explained, "authorizing us to search all structures on this property." She knew she couldn't refuse now. "Give me 5 minutes to get dressed properly," she said, closing the door. Ben looked at her with worried eyes. "Mom, what about the stuff Max found?" "Already hidden," she whispered, patting her son's shoulder. She'd stored the lockbox and its contents under the loose floorboard in their bedroom during the night. When Sarah reopened the door, Colonel Richards stood waiting with 2 other officers. "We'll start with the barn," he announced, consulting his clipboard. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Why were they so interested in the barn? She led the way across the dewy grass, Max following closely at her heels. The German shepherd's posture was alert but calm, which somehow reassured her. The barn's interior looked exactly as they'd found it yesterday, neat, organized, with farm equipment arranged precisely along the walls. The officers spread out, tapping walls and checking behind stored equipment. "Mrs. Peterson," Colonel Richards called, pointing to an area near the back. "What's under these hay bales?" Sarah moved closer, her eyes catching a glint of metal in the floor. Her fingers brushed against the key in her pocket, the one labeled Lauer. The hay bales had been arranged to partially conceal what appeared to be a trapdoor. I'm not sure," she said truthfully. "We just arrived yesterday." The colonel motioned to his men. "Clear this area." As they moved the hay bales, Sarah's mind raced. Whatever lay below, Daniel had wanted it hidden. But he'd also left them the key. Was this the right moment to use it? The trap door was fully exposed now, its metal handle gleaming in the morning light streaming through the barn's high windows. A heavy-duty padlock secured it. Colonel Richards frowned. "We'll need to cut this." "Wait," Sarah interrupted, pulling out the key. "I have this." The colonel's eyebrows rose slightly as she stepped forward. The key slid in smoothly, turning with a solid click. The officers stepped back as Sarah lifted the heavy door, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. Someone clicked on a flashlight. The beam illuminated concrete walls and sturdy wooden steps leading down. Sarah went first, her heart pounding. The air below was cool, but not stale, suggesting some kind of ventilation system. At the bottom, she found a light switch. Fluorescent tubes flickered to life, revealing a sight that made her gasp. The underground room was larger than the barn above, perhaps 40 feet square. Military-style cots lined the walls, neatly made with fresh-looking blankets and pillows. Metal shelving units held supplies, canned food, bottled water, first aid kits, and basic toiletries. Everything was meticulously organized and labeled. But it was the photos that caught her attention. Dozens of them covered one wall, protected by clear plastic sleeves. In each one, she saw Daniel, uniform. Sometimes in uniform, sometimes in civilian clothes, standing with different families. Children of various ages smiled at the camera. Parents hugged each other, relief evident on their faces. "What is all this?" Colonel Richards muttered, scanning the room. Sarah moved closer to the photo wall. Beneath each picture was a small note card with dates and names. She recognized some of the locations, areas that had been in the news over the years. Places affected by natural disasters or civil unrest. A bright orange fireproof pouch hung next to the photos. With trembling fingers, Sarah opened it and pulled out a leather-bound journal. Daniel's neat handwriting filled its pages. "Ma'am," the colonel began, "we need to." "This was my husband's," she said firmly, opening to the first page. "And I'm going to read it." The journal's first entry was dated 5 years ago. "Purchased Fallen Star Ranch today. It's perfect. Remote enough for privacy, but accessible when needed. The underground shelter from the Cold War era is intact. With some work, it will serve our purpose well. The families need a safe place, somewhere to catch their breath before starting over. This will be that place." Sarah flipped through more pages, her vision blurring with tears as Daniel's mission became clear. The ranch had been a secret sanctuary, a stopping point for families displaced by various crises. Her husband had worked with a network of trusted military colleagues to provide temporary shelter and assistance to those in need. 3 more families arrived tonight. One entry read. The children were so tired, but their eyes lit up when they saw the fresh bread and warm beds. This is why we do this. Every family deserves a chance to feel safe, to rest, to plan their next steps in peace. The morning sun streamed through the barn's high windows as Sarah climbed back up the stairs, clutching the journal to her chest. Max was waiting at the top, his steady presence a comfort as always. The German shepherd leaned against her leg as she emerged into the light. Daniel's secret ranch, she whispered, understanding finally dawning. This wasn't just property her husband had hidden from her. It was a mission of mercy he'd carried out in silence, helping others while maintaining operational security. Max pressed closer, his warm body supporting her as she stood there, processing the truth about her husband's legacy. The ranch wasn't just land and buildings. It was hope, sanctuary, and new beginnings for countless families who had needed it most. The morning sun streamed through the cabin windows as Sarah spooned steaming oatmeal into 2 bowls. Ben sat at the wooden table, his eyes fixed on the leather journal beside him. Max lay nearby, head on his paws but ears alert. Ready to learn more about what Dad was doing here? Sarah asked, sliding 1 bowl across to her son. She stirred honey into both portions, just the way they liked it. Ben nodded eagerly. Those pictures in the cellar, all those families. Dad helped them, didn't he? He sure did. Sarah opened the journal, careful not to get any breakfast on its well-worn pages. Listen to this entry from 3 years ago. Marked the 5th star point today. Each location holds stories that need to be preserved. The families may move on, but their gratitude and courage should never be forgotten. She paused, reaching for the topographical map they'd found earlier. Look here. She pointed to small star symbols sketched at different points around the property. 5 points, just like he wrote about. Ben leaned in closer, oatmeal forgotten. What's that grove marked there? Before Sarah could answer, Max's head lifted. The German shepherd stood, tail wagging slowly, and walked to the door. He looked back at them, expectantly. I think Max wants to show us something, Ben said, already pushing back his chair. They followed Max outside, the morning air still crisp. The dog trotted purposefully toward a small grove of oak trees that matched one of the star points on the map. When they reached the spot, Max began pawing at the ground near the largest tree's roots. Wait, boy. Sarah touched his shoulder gently. Ben, grab those shovels from the barn. The earth was soft from recent rain, and it didn't take long before their shovels struck something solid. Ben brushed away the remaining dirt, revealing a large metal coffee can, its lid sealed with tape. Careful, Sarah said as Ben pried it open. Inside, protected by plastic bags, were dozens of letters, some written on proper stationery, others on notebook paper, or whatever the writers had been able to find. Dear Doc Whitaker, Ben read from the first letter. We can never thank you enough for the sanctuary you provided. Our children still talk about the kind man with the German shepherd who gave them hope when we had none left. Sarah's throat tightened. Doc Whitaker, that must have been Dad's code name here. They spent the next hour reading letters aloud to each other, their voices mixing with birdsong and the rustle of oak leaves. Each note told a story of fear turned to hope, of desperate times made bearable by one man's kindness. Around noon, they heard a car approaching. Max's ears perked up, but he didn't growl, a good sign. Through the trees, They saw an older woman emerging from a well-maintained sedan, her silver hair caught in a neat bun. "Hello there," she called out, waving. "I'm Dr. Luis Ortega. The county registrar suggested I might find you here." Sarah stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "I'm Sarah Whitaker, and this is my son Ben. And that's Max." Dr. Ortega's eyes brightened at the sight of the German Shepherd. "Max, yes, I remember you." She turned to Sarah. "I worked with your husband Daniel on several cases over the years, though he never told me about this place. I've spent decades documenting refugee and displaced family assistance in this region." Ben held up one of the letters. "Did you know any of these families?" Dr. Ortega adjusted her glasses, taking the letter carefully. Her breath caught as she read. "Maria Suarez and her children. Yes, I remember them well. They came through my office at Social Services in 2019. Such a strong woman." She looked around the grove. "May I?" Sarah gestured to the collection of letters spread on the ground. "Please." For the next several hours, Dr. Ortega shared stories about the families she recognized, filling in details that weren't in the letters. She knew what had happened to many of them after they left the ranch. Careers built, children grown, lives restored. "Daniel never wanted recognition," she explained, her voice warm with memory. "He believed in quiet service, in doing what's right without fanfare. But he kept these letters, these testimonies. He knew the importance of preserving these stories." As afternoon stretched toward evening, they gathered the letters and moved to the cabin's front porch. Sarah made coffee for the adults and hot chocolate for Ben. Max settled between the rocking chairs, content to listen as they continued reading. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, its light catching the brass star on the front gate. Dr. Ortega held up another letter, her voice strong and clear in the evening air. "Dear Doc Whitaker, tonight my children sleep safely because of you. They no longer jump at sudden noises, they smile again. How does one thank someone for giving back childhood itself?" Sarah watched the shadows lengthen across the ranch yard. For the first time since receiving that certified letter, the property felt truly alive, not just with their presence, but with the echoes of all those who had found shelter here. Each letter they read added another voice, another story to the ranch's hidden history. Ben leaned against her chair, Max's head resting on his knee. "Mom," he whispered, "I'm really proud of Dad." "Me too, sweetheart," she replied, running her fingers through his hair. "Me too." The voices from the past seemed to fill the growing darkness. Voices of gratitude, of relief, of renewed hope. Dr. Ortega continued reading, each letter adding another layer to the legacy Daniel had left behind. As night settled over Fallen Star Ranch, the stories of those who had found sanctuary there lived on through written words and shared memories. A pearly mist hung low over the meadow as dawn broke across Fallen Star Ranch. Sarah stood on the cabin porch, coffee mug warming her hands, watching the fog roll like gentle waves across the tall grass. Max sat alert at her feet, his ears twitching at every sound carried on the morning air. The crunch of tires on gravel cut through the quiet. A weathered pickup truck appeared through the mist, moving slowly up the drive. Max stood but didn't growl. Instead, his tail gave a cautious wag. An elderly man emerged from the truck, his movements careful but deliberate. He wore a faded army jacket despite the warming day, and his white hair was trimmed in a military-precise cut. Deep lines etched his face, Speaking of years lived hard but fully. "Ma'am," he called out, touching 2 fingers to his temple in a casual salute. "Name Sergeant Eli Moran. I heard talk in town about Daniel Whitaker's place being found." His voice was gruff but gentle, like worn leather. Sarah set her coffee down. "I'm Sarah Whitaker, Daniel's wife. This is Max." The dog patted down the steps to sniff the newcomer's outstretched hand. "Good boy, Max. You haven't changed a bit." Eli scratched behind the shepherd's ears. "Your Daniel and this dog pulled me out of a real dark place, ma'am. Both literally and figuratively." Ben appeared in the doorway, curious about their visitor. "You knew Dad?" "That I did, son." Eli's eyes grew distant. "Back in 2008, I was stationed overseas. Got separated from my unit during a sandstorm. Your father found me half dead in a cave, delirious from dehydration. Max here tracked me down." He patted the dog's head. "Good part. Daniel didn't just save my life that day. He saved my soul later on, too. When I came home broken inside, he helped me find my way back." Sarah gestured toward the porch chairs. "Would you like some coffee, Sergeant Moran? I'd love to hear more." "Just Eli, please." "And yes, ma'am, coffee would be mighty welcome." As Sarah poured another mug, Eli settled into a rocker, his joints creaking almost as much as the chair. "Daniel told me about this place once, when I was at my lowest. Said if I ever needed somewhere quiet to heal, I should come find the fallen star. Never did take him up on it. Pride's a stubborn thing. But I never forgot." Ben leaned forward eagerly. "We found a trunk in cabin 2 yesterday, but we couldn't open it. Did Dad ever mention anything about that?" Eli's eyes lit up. "Matter of fact, he did. Said something about keeping important papers there." He looked at Sarah. "Mind if we take a look?" They walked together to the second cabin, Max trotting ahead. The trunk sat against the far wall, solid oak bound with brass, its surface scratched but well maintained. Sarah produced the key they'd found in the lockbox. "Allow me," Eli offered, taking the key with steady hands. The lock turned with a solid click. Inside, carefully folded quilts filled the top layer, each one unique, clearly handmade with love. Beneath them lay rows of children's shoes, ranging from tiny baby booties to teenagers' sneakers, all cleaned and paired neatly. "Daniel believed in being prepared," Eli explained, gently lifting out the quilts. "Said you never knew when someone might arrive with nothing but the clothes on their back." Deeper in the trunk, they found manila folders filled with documents. Sponsor records, Sarah realized. Pages of names, dates, and notes detailed the quiet network Daniel had built to help families start new lives. "Your husband was thorough," Eli noted. "Kept track of every soul that passed through. Made sure they all had somewhere to go next. Real careful about security, too. Never used real names in these records. Always code names." Sarah's heart swelled with pride, even as she ached with fresh grief for the man she'd thought she knew completely. Then she spotted something that made her breath catch, a photograph tucked between folders. The image showed Daniel kneeling beside a small girl, no more than 3 years old. His arm was around her protectively, but something in the way they were positioned made Sarah's stomach tighten. The girl's face showed fear, and Daniel's expression was grim. "Wait," Eli said, noting her concern. He carefully turned the photograph over. On the back, in elegant handwriting, was a note. "Dearest Doc Whitaker, this photo captures the moment you saved my Layla from those who would have taken her. Your courage gave my daughter back her future. We can never repay such a debt." With eternal gratitude, Zara Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Of course, Daniel had been protecting the child, not harming her. She felt ashamed for even allowing the shadow of suspicion to cross her mind. "I remember that case," Eli said softly. Zara and her daughter had fled some real bad situations. Human traffickers were trying to grab the girl when Daniel intervened. He got them both to safety here at the ranch, then helped them establish new identities in Canada. Ben had been quiet, taking it all in. Now he pulled out one of the quilts, running his fingers over the intricate stitching. "Did the families make these?" "Some did," Eli nodded. "Others came from local church groups who supported Daniel's work. Each one has a story." He pointed to a particular square on the quilt. "See that star pattern there? That's Zara's work. She was a master quilter back in her home country." They spent the next hour going through the trunk's contents, with Eli sharing the stories he knew. Each item revealed another facet of Daniel's secret mission. B10, not just offering shelter, but creating a complete support system for people in crisis. As the morning wore on, Ben grew restless. Eli noticed and smiled. "Say, young man, how about you help me with something? That windmill could use some maintenance." Ben's eyes lit up. "Really? Sure thing. Your dad taught me how to service it proper." About time someone passed that knowledge along. They walked to the windmill together, while Sarah stayed behind to carefully repack the trunk. Through the window, she watched as Eli patiently demonstrated how to oil the gears, his weathered hands guiding Ben's smaller ones. Max sprawled in the sunny grass nearby, his tail sweeping lazy arcs through the meadow flowers. The fog had burned away completely now, leaving behind a perfect spring morning. Sarah could hear Eli's deep voice carrying on the breeze, mixing with Ben's eager questions about the windmill's mechanics. The ranch felt different now, more complete somehow. With each new visitor, each revealed story, it was transforming from a mysterious inheritance into something alive and meaningful. This wasn't just Daniel's secret anymore. It was becoming their purpose, their legacy to understand and perhaps continue. Sarah touched one of the quilts one last time before closing the trunk. Each stitch represented a life touched, a family helped, a story of hope woven into the very fabric of this place. Her husband's hidden acts of kindness were finally coming to light, and she couldn't have been prouder. The early afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ranch yard when the black government sedan pulled up to the gate. Sarah watched from the porch as Agent Kincaid stepped out, his demeanor noticeably different from his previous visit. Gone was the rigid stance and cold professionalism. Instead, he carried a leather messenger bag and walked with an almost casual stride. "Mrs. Whitaker," he called out, raising a hand in greeting. "Mind if we talk?" Sarah nodded, noting how Max's tail gave a tentative wag. The German Shepherd's reaction confirmed her own sense that something had shifted in the agent's approach. "Come on up," she said. "And please, call me Sarah." Louise Ortega sat in one of the wooden rocking chairs, her silver hair gleaming in the sunlight. She gave Kincaid an appraising look as he climbed the steps. "Agent Kincaid," she said. "I trust you're here with better news than last time?" He smiled slightly, pulling up a chair. "Actually, yes. My superiors have reviewed the initial findings, and they're intrigued by what we've discovered here." Sarah brought out a pitcher of iced tea and glasses. The ice clinked musically as she poured, the sound mixing with distant birdsong and the creaking of the old windmill. "I need to record your testimony about the ranch's operations," Kincaid explained, pulling out a small digital recorder. "Everything you've learned about how your husband ran things, the people he helped, the systems he put in place." For the next 2 hours, Sarah shared Daniel's story, with Louise adding historical context about the broader refugee crisis during those years. They showed Kincaid the journal entries, the sponsor records, and Zara's photograph. Max dozed at Sarah's feet, occasionally lifting his head when voices grew animated. "The thing that strikes me," Kincaid said, pausing to sip his tea, "is how organized it all was. Your husband created a legitimate humanitarian operation, even if it had to stay under the radar at the time." Louise nodded. Daniel understood the power of proper documentation. Every person who passed through here had their story recorded, their needs assessed, their next steps planned. "That's actually why I'm here," Kincaid said, reaching into his bag. "There's a possibility we could preserve this place, protect its legacy. If Daniel's paperwork holds up to scrutiny, we could classify the ranch as a historical site of humanitarian significance." Sarah's heart leaped. "You mean we could keep it running? Maybe even help people again?" "Potentially. But there's a complication." Kincaid pulled out a legal document. "This arrived at my office this morning. A lawyer representing someone named James Whitaker has filed a claim on the property." "James Whitaker?" Sarah frowned. "I've never heard of him." "Apparently, he's a distant cousin of Daniel's. The lawyer argues that since Daniel's ownership was never properly registered, the ranch should be liquidated and the proceeds distributed to all legal heirs." Louise made a disapproving sound. "Vultures circling already. I knew some of the Whitakers back then. Money-minded bunch, most of them. Wanted nothing to do with Daniel's humanitarian work." Sarah felt her chest tighten. "But the letter from the county registrar shows Daniel's ownership." "Yes," Kincaid agreed. "But we need more. The lawyer is challenging the legitimacy of how the property was acquired in the first place." Louise straightened in her chair. "The seller files," she said suddenly. "Sarah, remember those boxes we didn't get through yet? Daniel kept everything. There might be purchase records, transfer documents, something to establish clear title." "It's worth checking," Kincaid said. "The more documentation we have, the better chance of preserving this place." They spent the rest of the afternoon in the cellar, going through dusty boxes by lantern light. The generator had been acting up all day, its usually steady hum now irregular and weak. Daniel mentioned something about property papers. Sarah remembered, pulling another box from the shelf. He was always so careful about keeping records. The afternoon light filtering through the cellar's small windows gradually dimmed as pies. Storm clouds gathered overhead. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the temperature dropped noticeably. "We should wrap up soon," Louise said, checking her watch. "That storm's moving in fast." Upstairs in the main cabin, they spread their findings across the kitchen table. The generator's sputter grew worse, making the overhead lights flicker ominously. "There has to be something here," Sarah muttered, sorting through another folder. The lantern light cast strange shadows on the cabin walls as the generator finally gave out with a defeated wheeze. Max, who had been dozing near the wood stove, suddenly lifted his head. His ears pricked forward, alert and focused. Sarah watched him, remembering how the German shepherd's instincts had led them to other discoveries around the ranch. The light outside had turned an eerie greenish-gray as the storm approached. Thunder boomed closer now, and the first heavy drops of rain began to strike the cabin's metal roof. In the lantern's wavering light, Sarah could see the concern on Agent Kincaid's face as he studied another document. Louise adjusted her reading glasses, squinting at the papers spread before them. The lanterns flickered as a particularly strong gust of wind rattled the cabin's windows. Max remained still, his attention fixed on something none of them could perceive. Sarah felt the weight of the moment, their race against time to save Daniel's legacy, the gathering storm outside, and somewhere in these papers. Perhaps the very document they needed to keep this sanctuary alive. Her fingers traced the edge of another folder, wondering what secrets it might contain. Max's ears remained forward, his posture tense but not alarmed. Through the windows, lightning illuminated the yard in brief, brilliant flashes, throwing the searching figures around the table into sharp relief as they continued their urgent work by lantern light. A deafening crack of thunder shook the cabin, making the lanterns dance wildly on the white table. Sarah jumped, scattering papers across the floor. Even Agent Kincaid flinched at the sudden boom. "That was right overhead," Louise said, helping Sarah gather the fallen documents. "The storm's getting worse." Rain drummed against the roof with increasing intensity. Through the windows, lightning illuminated the yard in stark flashes, casting strange shadows through the trees. "We should check the cellar again," Sarah suggested, raising her voice over the storm. "There might be something we missed in those back corners." They made their way down the creaking stairs, lanterns swaying with each step. The cellar air felt thick and damp, heavy with the smell of earth and old wood. Max trotted ahead, his nails clicking against the concrete floor. "At least it's dry down here," Kincaid remarked, holding his lantern high to illuminate the shelves. They spread out, checking different sections of the underground room. Suddenly, Max began scratching furiously at a wooden plank near the far wall. His claws made an urgent sound against the wood, different from his usual investigating behavior. "Max," Ben called out, moving closer with his flashlight. "What did you find, boy?" The German shepherd's tail wagged with excitement as he continued to scratch. Sarah knelt beside him, running her hands over the plank. It felt slightly loose. "There's something here," she said, working her fingers along the edges. With a grunt of effort, she managed to pry the board up. Louise held her lantern closer. In the space beneath lay a metal tube, about 18 inches long, sealed tight against moisture. "It looks military grade," Kincaid observed, helping Sarah extract it. "Waterproof storage, the kind they use for sensitive documents." Sarah's hands trembled as she unscrewed the cap. Inside, she found several papers carefully rolled together, along with what appeared to be a small flash drive. "Let's get these upstairs where we can see better," Louise suggested. Back at the kitchen table, Sarah carefully unrolled the first document. Her breath caught as she recognized Daniel's handwriting. "It's a letter," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "To me." The others fell silent as she began to read. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then you've discovered the ranch and all it represents. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you about this place while I was alive. The work we did here needed to stay secret to protect those we helped. But now you know about the sanctuary, and I pray you'll understand why I kept this hidden. The enclosed trust documents make you the legal steward of Fallen Star Ranch. Everything is properly signed and notarized. The flash drive contains all the digital records, photos, correspondence, financial transactions that prove the ranch's legitimate purchase and operation. You always said I had a way of helping people see hope in dark times. This place was my way of putting that into action. With your compassion and strength, I know you'll honor its legacy. All my love, Daniel." Sarah wiped tears from her cheeks as she set down the letter. Thunder rumbled overhead, but softer now, the storm beginning to move away. "The trust documents," Kincaid said gently, reaching for the other papers. "May I?" Sarah nodded, still too emotional to speak. The agent scanned the papers, his expression brightening. "This is exactly what we needed," he confirmed. "Properly executed, witnessed, and notarized. It establishes clear title and your legal authority as trustee." "But what about the flash drive?" Ben asked, picking up the small device. "We need a password to see what's on it." Sarah studied the drive, trying to remember if Daniel had mentioned anything about passwords. "He must have left us a clue somewhere." "Dad always said the answers were in the stars," Ben mused, remembering his father's favorite saying. Louise's eyes widened. "The brass star on the front gate. What about it?" Sarah asked. "When we first arrived, I noticed it. Had something etched around the edges," Ben said excitedly. "Dad used to say that star would always guide us home." Despite the late hour and the lingering rain, they hurried out to the gate. Ben shone his flashlight on the brass star, revealing tiny numbers and letters carved into its points. "It's a code," he said proudly, "just like the ones Dad and I used to make up." Back inside, they connected the flash drive to Louise's laptop. Ben carefully entered the code from the star, and the screen lit up with folders full of documents. "It's all here," Kincaid said, amazed. "Purchase records, correspondence with authorities, documentation of every family that passed through. This proves everything." Sarah immediately emailed copies of the trust documents to their lawyer. The timestamp read 12:45 a.m. when she finally hit send. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clean, rain-washed silence. Louise and Kincaid said their goodbyes, promising to return in the morning to go through the flash drive's contents more thoroughly. In the quiet cabin, Sarah found herself on the old couch, Ben curled against her side. Max lay at their feet, his steady presence a comfort, as always. "Mom?" Ben's voice was sleepy. "Are we going to keep helping people here, like Dad did?" Sarah stroked his hair, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over her. "Yes, sweetheart. That's exactly what we're going to do." The soft sounds of nighttime filled the cabin, crickets singing after the rain, wind rustling through wet leaves, and the gentle breathing of her son and their faithful dog. Sarah felt Daniel's presence all around them, in every corner of this sanctuary he'd created. Her eyes grew heavy as exhaustion finally caught up with her. The last thing she saw before drifting off was moonlight breaking through the clouds, casting silver light across the cabin floor. The ranch was safe now, and tomorrow would bring new possibilities for continuing Daniel's legacy of hope. The morning sun painted the ranch in fresh colors after the storm. Puddles dotted the yard, reflecting blue sky where dark clouds had loomed just hours before. Sarah stood on the porch, coffee mug warming her hands, watching Ben and Max splash through the wet grass. Her phone buzzed. Agent Kincaid's name lit up the screen. "Good morning, Sarah." His voice carried a warmth she hadn't heard before. "I've been up half the night, reviewing those trust documents with our legal team. Everything checks out perfectly. The ranch is protected under your stewardship." Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Thank you, Agent Kincaid. That means more than you know." "Please, call me James," he said. There was a pause before he continued. I had another thought. What would you think about hosting a small gathering? A remembrance for Daniel and the work he did here? I've already heard from several families who'd like to share their stories. Sarah watched Ben throwing a stick for Max, his laughter carrying across the yard. I think Daniel would have liked that. After hanging up, Sarah began preparing the main cabin. She wiped years of dust from photo frames, arranged fresh wildflowers in mason jars, and set out Daniel's journal where visitors could see it. The simple acts of cleaning and organizing helped settle her mind. Around 10 o'clock, the sound of tires on gravel drew her attention. A silver sedan pulled up, and two women stepped out, one older with silver-streaked dark hair wrapped in an elegant headscarf, the other young and vibrant in a bright summer dress. "Hello?" The older woman called out softly. "I am Zara. This is my daughter, Layla. We heard about Daniel." Sarah met them on the porch steps. Zara carried a carefully folded quilt in her arms, while Layla held a worn photo album. "Please, come in," Sarah said, gesturing toward the cabin. "I'm Sarah, Daniel's wife." Zara's eyes filled with tears as she took Sarah's hands in hers. "Your husband, he saved our lives. Not just protected us, but gave us hope when we had none." Inside, they settled around the kitchen table. Zara carefully unfolded the quilt, revealing intricate patterns in deep blues and golds. "I made this here during the months we stayed. Daniel brought me fabric scraps and thread. He said keeping my hands busy would help my heart heal." Layla opened the photo album, pointing to a faded picture of a much younger Daniel kneeling beside a tiny girl on a pink bicycle. "That's me, learning to ride," she said, smiling. "I was so scared, but he ran alongside me for hours until I got it right." Sarah traced the image with trembling fingers. "I never knew about any of this. He couldn't tell me to keep you all safe." "We were not the only ones," Zara said softly. "So many families passed through here. Daniel gave each child a bicycle lesson. He said every child should know that freedom." More photos showed Daniel teaching other children to ride, helping families plant a small garden, reading stories on the porch. In each one, his smile was exactly as Sarah remembered it, gentle and full of purpose. "Look at this one," Layla said, turning a page. The photo showed Daniel and a young Layla painting stars on small wooden shapes. "We made Christmas ornaments that December. He told me each star represented a wish for peace." Ben wandered in from outside, curious about the visitors. When Layla introduced herself, his eyes went wide. "You're the little girl from the picture in the trunk." Layla laughed. "I was. Would you like to hear about the time your dad helped me rescue a baby rabbit?" While Ben listened to Layla's story, Zara pulled something else from her bag, dozens of brightly colored ribbons. "In my culture, we tie prayer ribbons to remember those we have lost. Each color has meaning: blue for wisdom, gold for kindness, green for growth. Would you like to honor Daniel this way?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. They gathered the ribbons and walked out to the fence near the brass stargate. The afternoon sun had warmed the metal, making it glow like honey. One by one, they began tying ribbons to the fence posts. Zara hummed softly, an old song from her homeland about remembrance and gratitude. Ben helped Layla braid 3 ribbons together before adding them to the fence. "Blue for Dad's smart ideas," he said seriously. "Gold because he was kind to everyone. And green because he helped people grow stronger." Sarah watched the ribbons dance in the breeze. their colors bright against the weathered wood. For the first time since Daniel's death, the ache in her heart felt different, not gone, but softer, warmed by the stories of his secret kindness. Max trotted over to lean against her leg, his familiar presence steadying her as always. Zara stepped close, putting an arm around Sarah's shoulders. "Your husband gave us shelter when we had nowhere else to go," she said quietly. "Now you know the full measure of his heart. And look," she gestured to where Layla was showing Ben how to make a perfect bow with the ribbons, both of them laughing in the sunshine. "His legacy lives on in all of us." Sarah squeezed Zara's hand, feeling the first real stirrings of hope since Daniel's death. The ranch wasn't just a piece of property anymore. It was a testament to love that reached beyond borders and boundaries, a sanctuary where healing could still happen. The afternoon light warmed them as they continued adding ribbons, each one carrying prayers, memories, and promises for the future. The gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of rain-washed earth and new possibilities. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Sarah watched from the porch as Eli and Ben arranged folding chairs in neat rows across the yard. Louise strung paper lanterns between the posts, their colorful shapes swaying gently in the breeze. Agent Kincaid pulled up in his government vehicle, stepping out with a warm smile. "I've arranged for a small local newspaper to cover the gathering," he said. "Nothing flashy, just enough to document the ranch's history and purpose." The crunch of tires on gravel announced another arrival. Captain Russell emerged from a military vehicle, followed by several of his soldiers. The captain's usually stern expression had softened. "Ma'am," he said, approaching Sarah, "we owe you an apology for our heavy-handed approach earlier. We didn't understand what this place truly meant." Ben sat cross-legged on the porch, carefully painting wooden stars with bright colors. Each one would mark a sanctuary point on the ranch where Daniel had helped families. His tongue stuck out slightly as he concentrated on making each star perfect. "These are for the places where Dad helped people," he explained to a young soldier who stopped to watch. "Like the grove where we found the letters and the barn where families slept safe." As the sun began its descent, the ranch transformed. Hundreds of twinkling lights created a warm glow across the yard. Cars began arriving quietly, their headlights cutting through the growing dusk. People emerged carrying covered dishes, handmade quilts, and candles. The air filled with the mingled scents of home-cooked meals and the soft murmur of voices sharing memories. As twilight settled over Fallen Star Ranch, guests gathered beneath the old windmill. Solar lights traced gentle patterns across faces, weathered by time and tears, faces that held stories waiting to be shared. The meadow grass whispered in the evening breeze, as if nature itself was hushing to listen. An elderly man stood first, his voice trembling but clear. 23 years ago, Daniel saved my family when we had nowhere else to go. He didn't just give us shelter, he gave us hope." Others nodded, remembering their own arrivals at this hidden sanctuary. A middle-aged woman spoke next, her accent still thick with her homeland. "My children were so scared when we came. But Daniel would sit with them at night, teaching them to count the stars until they felt safe enough to sleep." She wiped tears from her eyes. "Now my daughter is a teacher herself." One by one, they rose to share their stories. Tales of midnight arrivals, of healing wounds both visible and hidden, of finding strength in the shelter of these walls. Each testimony wove another thread into the tapestry of Daniel's legacy. Sarah stood, Daniel's worn journal in her hands. Her fingers found the dog-eared page she'd discovered just days ago. In the gentle light, she read his words aloud. Tonight, I sat beside another child who couldn't sleep. We counted breaths together, in and out, slow and steady. Later, when my own nightmares came, I remembered those peaceful breaths. The children I help here, they heal me too. Her voice grew stronger as she looked up at the gathered faces. This ranch will remain what Daniel made it, a sanctuary. We'll hold remembrance days like this one, keeping these stories alive for future generations. Because everyone needs a safe place to count their breaths, to find their peace. Ben leaned against her side as Max settled at their feet. The German shepherd's steady presence anchored them, just as he had through all their discoveries. Someone began to hum, and others joined in. The familiar melody of Amazing Grace rose into the darkening sky, carried on dozens of voices. Lanterns swayed gently in the breeze, their light dancing across tear-streaked faces now filled with peace. As night deepened around them, Max pressed his head against Ben's lap, his brown eyes reflecting the golden light of the lanterns. The hymn floated across the meadow, a testament to hope that had found root in this hidden corner of the world, where one man's compassion had changed so many lives. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fallen Star Ranch as people gathered near the entrance gate. A canvas-covered sign waited to be unveiled, its presence drawing curious glances from the assembled crowd. Sarah stood with Ben beside her, Max alert at their feet, as Louise stepped forward to address the group. Today, we honor not just memories, but a living legacy, Louise began, her historian's voice carrying across the hushed gathering. With a gentle tug, she pulled away the canvas, revealing the new wooden sign. Fallen Star Ranch. Sanctuary, where stars fall, we lift one another. Quiet murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. Captain Russell stood at attention with several of his soldiers, their formal uniforms a stark contrast to the casual dress of the townspeople and survivors who had come to share in this moment. Let's begin our walk, Sarah announced, holding up one of Ben's painted wooden stars. Each star marks a place where someone found shelter here. We'll plant them together. The group moved like a peaceful parade across the ranch grounds. At each marked point on Daniel's old map, someone stepped forward to share a memory before placing a star. Max trotted ahead of them, as if he knew exactly where each marker should go. Near the old oak grove, Zara planted a star while Layla held her hand. Here is where we slept our first night in America, she said softly. Daniel brought us blankets and hot chocolate. By the windmill, Captain Russell himself drove a star into the earth. Your husband taught us that true service means helping everyone, not just those who look like us or speak our language. In the barn, Louise and several volunteers had transformed the space into a gallery of quilts. Each handmade blanket hung from the rafters, creating warm corridors of color and memory. Sarah paused before one that featured a pattern of stars and moons. This one, an elderly woman explained, touching the fabric gently, we made during the long nights when we couldn't sleep. Daniel said sewing helped quiet the mind. As the afternoon progressed, Sarah received news that lifted another weight from her shoulders. Her lawyer called to inform her that the Whitaker cousin had withdrawn his claim to the property. The official trust documents were being filed, securing the ranch's future as a sanctuary under her family's stewardship. The news spread quickly through the gathered crowd, prompting spontaneous hugs and tears of joy. Ben ran to tell Eli, who had become a frequent visitor and mentor figure during their short time at the ranch. As golden hour approached, the visitors began to drift away, leaving behind their planted stars glowing in the late afternoon light. Sarah and Ben settled onto the porch steps, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Max lay at their feet, his chin resting on his paws, ever vigilant even in rest. Prayer ribbons tied to the fence posts fluttered in the gentle breeze, each one carrying wishes, hopes, and thanks from those whose lives had been touched by this place. The cabins no longer looked abandoned or mysterious. They stood proud and purposeful, windows gleaming with new life. Sarah wrapped an arm around Ben's shoulders, drawing him close. Looking out over their sanctuary, seeing the wooden stars marking points of salvation across the property, she felt Daniel's presence stronger than ever. "Whatever we choose," she whispered, her words carried on the wind, "we choose love." Ben leaned into her embrace as Max's tail thumped contentedly against the porch boards. The cabins glowed in the fading light, their windows warm and welcoming, ready to shelter new stories of hope and healing in the years to come. If even one moment stayed with you, hit subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story written gently for the heart.